Summer 1945. The war was over, though no one quite believed it yet. The Kansas prairie lay under a sky so wide it seemed to stretch into yesterday. Heat shimmered over the dusty road leading to the camp, the barbed wire fence humming with cicadas. On the other side of that fence, German women waited, silent and sunburnt, their skirts stiff with weeks of dirt. Evelyn Carter stepped down from the truck, boots sinking into powdery earth. The sun caught the brass buttons of her uniform and set them flashing like coins. She adjusted her cap and took a deep breath, bracing against the smell that rolled toward her. Sweat, old fear, unwashed bodies. She had seen worse smells, field hospitals near Bastogne where death had its own sharp perfume, but this one struck differently. This was not the smell of war ending. It was the smell of what war left behind. Corporal Jack Dusty Miller leaned out of the cab, grinning under the shade of his cap. "Welcome to paradise," he drawled, his Kansas accent flat as the horizon. "Population, a few hundred enemy ladies who probably hate our guts." "They don't look dangerous," Evelyn said, though she kept her voice low. The women behind the fence watched in eerie stillness, some shading their eyes, others standing so straight they might have been carved from bone. "That's what makes it weird," Dusty replied. "I seen prisoners who'd spit at you, curse you. These ones just stare like we're ghosts." Evelyn's gaze swept over them. Thin wrists, hollow cheeks, hair braided too tight as if neatness could hold the world together. One woman in the front clutched a baby against her hip. The child's head was bald from malnutrition. Evelyn's throat tightened. She had come prepared for the wounded, the sick. She hadn't come prepared for their dignity. Captain Sam Richter approached from the office, his clipboard tucked under one arm. He was a tall man with a square jaw and the tired eyes of someone who'd signed too many forms about rations, complaints, and casualties. "Carter," he said, giving a curt nod. "You're here to keep these women alive and reasonably civil until Washington decides what to do with them. We don't need martyrs, we don't need riots, and we sure as hell don't need typhus." "Yes, sir," she replied. He handed her a list. Names, ages, conditions, neat columns of humanity reduced to ink. Some of these women were captured in France, some in Italy. A few claimed they weren't even in the Wehrmacht, just wives who followed their husbands. "Doesn't matter. They're ours now." "Ours?" Evelyn repeated, staring at the paper. The word felt strange. These women were not enemies in the way a bullet was an enemy. They were what war had swept up and dumped here like debris after a flood. Dusty nudged her elbow. "Want to meet the neighbors?" The gates groaned open and Evelyn stepped inside. The women parted slightly, allowing her to pass, their faces unreadable. She felt the weight of their eyes like stones in her pockets. A voice rose from the group. "Sprechen Sie Deutsch?" Evelyn turned. The speaker was a tall woman with ash-blonde hair pinned severely under a kerchief. Her blue eyes were sharp, but there was no hostility in them, only the tight-lipped courtesy of someone raised to mind her manners even under duress. "Ein wenig," Evelyn said carefully. "A little." The woman inclined her head. "I am Anneliese Bauer," she said in precise English. "I was a teacher before all this." Her hand made a small circle, as if to gather war, surrender, and capture into a single motion. Evelyn nodded. "I'm here to help," she said, though the words sounded pale against the heat. "Help," Anneliese repeated, tasting the syllable as though it might be a trap. She exchanged a glance with another woman, younger, dressed in a skirt so tattered it barely reached her knees. The girl clutched the hem as if to keep it from falling apart entirely. Evelyn followed her gaze and caught sight of the camp's water barrels, dusty, half-empty. She imagined what it must be like to live day after day with no soap, no clean clothes, nothing to make you feel human. She turned to Captain Richter. "They need supplies. Soap, skirts, something." "We've got crates of Red Cross stuff sitting in the depot," he said, scribbling on his clipboard. "Been waiting for someone to sort it. Guess that's you." By late afternoon Evelyn and Dusty had set up a table near the gate, laying out bars of soap wrapped in thin brown paper and bundles of plain cotton skirts in army drab colors. The women gathered in a hesitant semicircle, their eyes darting from the supplies to Evelyn's face. "Come forward one at a time," Evelyn called gently. "There's enough for everyone." No one moved. The silence stretched until it felt like the sky might split under it. Finally Anneliese stepped forward. She held out her hands, palms up, like a parishioner receiving communion. Evelyn placed a bar of soap in her left hand and a folded skirt in her right. For a moment Anneliese did not move. Then her shoulders trembled. She pressed the soap to her face and inhaled deeply, tears streaking the dust on her cheeks. She whispered something in German, too soft for Evelyn to catch, then turned back to the others and nodded. The line began to move. One by one the women came forward, each taking soap, a skirt, sometimes both hands shaking. Some smiled shyly. Others simply stared, stunned by the suddenness of this small mercy. Hilda Weber, the youngest of them, laughed when she saw the skirt's wide pockets. "For bread," she said in halting English, patting the pocket as though it were a treasure chest. Even Dusty fell quiet, his usual smirk fading. "Well, I'll be," he muttered. "Didn't think giving away laundry day would make folks cry." As the sun slid lower, the camp took on an almost festive air. Women washed at the barrels, scrubbing away grime wringing out their hair. They hung their old rags on the fence like flags of surrender and slipped into the fresh skirts. The fabric hung stiffly, but their posture changed. Backs straightened, heads lifted, as though dignity had been sewn into the seams. Evelyn watched them, a strange warmth rising in her chest. She thought of her brother Daniel, buried somewhere in Belgium, and wondered what he would think of her tending to the enemy. Perhaps this was what he fought for, not revenge but a world where mercy still had a place. As twilight fell, a sound drifted across the camp, singing. Soft at first, then stronger voices weaving together in a hymn Evelyn didn't recognize. The melody floated up to the darkening sky, mingling with the scent of soap and damp earth. Dusty sat on the hood of the truck, hat tipped back. "Well, Carter," he said, "looks like you started something." "Maybe," she said. Annalise approached, her new skirt brushing against her calves. "We thank you," she said formally. Then, after a pause, she added in German, "You have given us back our faces." Evelyn felt the words settle deep inside her. She had expected resentment, even hatred. She had not expected gratitude. Night gathered, bringing with it a sudden coolness. The women drifted back to their barracks, quieter now, as if afraid to disturb whatever spell had been cast. Evelyn remained by the gate, watching the stars come out one by one. Somewhere in the dark, a baby began to cry, not the weak, dry cry of hunger but something louder, stronger. It sounded like life returning. Captain Richter appeared beside her, lighting a cigarette. "You did good work today," he said gruffly. "But don't get too comfortable. Orders could come any day. Repatriation, transfers, hell, they might send half of them to Texas tomorrow." Evelyn nodded, though a hollow opened in her stomach. She had barely learned their names. "Anyway," he said, flicking ash into the dust, "Washington doesn't care about soap and skirts. They care about keeping order." He turned and strode away, leaving a faint trail of smoke. Evelyn looked back at the fence, at the skirts fluttering like pale flags in the breeze. Tomorrow she would inventory the supplies, check the sick, start the routine of care. But tonight she stood still, letting the night wind wash over her, feeling for the first time since the war ended that something fragile and unfinished had begun. From the far barack came a single note of singing, clear as glass. It hung in the air, then broke off sharply as though swallowed by the dark. Evelyn shivered. Something was coming, she could feel it in her bones. And when it came, it would change everything. Summer mornings came early in Kansas, all light and heat and the smell of dry grass. By dawn, the camp stirred, rustles of movement from the barracks, murmurs in German, the clank of tin cups. Evelyn Carter stood at the water barrel, sleeves rolled, soap suds sliding down her wrists as she rinsed her hands. The women had lined up before sunrise, eager for their turn to wash. The air buzzed with quiet anticipation, as if the very act of scrubbing away dirt could erase the last 4 years. Annalise Bauer emerged from the barack first, her new skirt hanging neatly despite the camp's dust. She had washed her hair, braided it into 2 plaits that shone gold in the morning light. She looked like a woman stepping out of a dream of normalcy. "You look better," Evelyn said, handing her a clean rag. Annalise nodded, a shadow of pride flickering in her expression. "It feels different. We are less ashamed now." Evelyn caught the plural. "We." Not I. Not me. We. A collective dignity had been rekindled overnight, and it startled her how quickly the women had shifted from silent shadows to something more alive. Soon the others joined, skirts rustling like a field of wheat. Hilda Weber laughed aloud when the cold water splashed her face, a laugh so clear and young that a few women nearby smiled despite themselves. Sister Margot Klein stood patiently at the end of the line, her hands folded. When her turn came, she washed with slow reverence as though it were a sacrament. By mid-morning, the camp smelled faintly of soap and wet cotton. The women had hung their old rags on the wire fence, fluttering like defeated banners. Dusty passed by, balancing a crate of tinned meat on his shoulder, and paused to take in the sight. "Well, I'll be," he said. "Looks like a ladies' laundry social out here." Evelyn shot him a look, but a few of the women smiled, catching the humor even if they didn't catch all the words. Dusty's grin widened. Careful, Carter. At this rate they'll be starting a fashion parade. They deserve this, Evelyn said quietly. He sobered. Yeah, guess they do. After breakfast, Evelyn gathered a few women to teach basic sanitation routines, how to boil water, how to scrub the barracks floors. Annalise translated her instructions into crisp German, her teacher's voice returning with each sentence. The others listened, nodding, suddenly eager students. When the work was done, they lingered in the yard, sitting in circles on the ground. Someone began humming a lullaby, and soon more voices joined, weaving the melody through the warm air. Evelyn felt the sound settle into her bones. Music had been missing from this place, and now it returned like a long-lost bird. But not all was gentle. That afternoon a scuffle broke out near the storage shed. Two women wrestled in the dust, shouting in rapid German, a bar of soap clutched between them. Others gathered, cheering or jeering until Evelyn and Dusty rushed over. Hey, break it up. Dusty barked, pulling them apart. Evelyn crouched between them, heart pounding. What happened? Annalise stepped forward, explaining tersely. The smaller woman, Erica, had stolen a second bar of soap from Marta's bundle. Soap had become precious overnight, worth fighting for. Evelyn looked into Erica's hollow eyes and saw not malice but panic. You will all have enough, she said firmly. But not if you fight each other. For a moment no one moved. Then Marta dropped the bar into the dust, her chin trembling. Evelyn picked it up, brushed it off and pressed it back into Erica's hand. Keep it, she said. Tomorrow there will be more. Annalise frowned. If you are too kind, they will take advantage. Maybe, Evelyn replied. But today I'd rather they remember mercy than punishment. That night, as crickets began their chorus, Evelyn sat outside the infirmary, writing a letter she would never send. Daniel, she wrote to her brother, I wish you could see them. They are not the enemy I imagined. They are women, tired and stubborn, who just want to feel clean again. If this is treason, then I am guilty, but it feels like the only thing worth doing. A rustle made her glance up. Margot stood a few feet away, hands clasped. I am sorry to disturb, she said softly. Some of the women cannot sleep. The children cry. Evelyn closed her notebook and rose. Let's see what we can do. Inside the barack the air was thick with heat. Several children whimpered, restless. Evelyn mixed powdered milk with water, passing tin cups around. Hilda cradled one little boy and began to hum again, the same tune as before. Soon the children quieted, eyelids drooping. When she stepped back outside, the moon was high, silvering the fence. Annalise approached her, arms folded. You give them hope, she said almost accusingly. Is that bad? Evelyn asked. It is dangerous, Annalise said. Hope can break a person if it is false. I'm not here to lie to you, Evelyn replied. But I can't stand by and watch you suffer when I can do something. Annalise's face softened just slightly. I was a teacher. I told my students the world was good and fair. Then the bombs came. They asked me if I lied. I still do not know the answer. Evelyn had no answer for that either. Days passed. The camp changed. There was less shouting, less despair. The women moved with new energy, sweeping floors, mending clothes, even planting a tiny row of beans near the fence. Dusty joked that soon they'd have a victory garden. Maybe we'll have a harvest dance, he said, tipping his hat. Even Captain Richter noticed. Carter, he said one evening, I don't know what you're doing, but keep doing it. Fewer complaints, fewer fights. Washington likes calm. But calm was fragile. One afternoon, a truck arrived from the depot with fewer crates than expected. Rations had been cut. There wasn't enough meat for everyone. Evelyn stood at the table, heart hammering as the women lined up. She gave smaller portions, stretching what little they had, but tension rose like heat before a storm. Some women muttered under their breath. They think we starve them on purpose, Annalise warned quietly. I'll requisition more, Evelyn promised. That night, someone scratched words into the dirt outside the barack. Wann gehen wir heim? When do we go home? Evelyn stared at the message by lantern light, her stomach twisting. She had no answer. She didn't even know if the women would be sent home soon or kept for months. The next morning she found Margot kneeling in prayer by the fence, fingers moving over an invisible rosary. You pray for them, Evelyn said. For them, Margot agreed. And for you. Evelyn smiled faintly. Pray for Washington to hurry up. By the end of the week, the camp seemed to hold its breath. The women were cleaner, healthier, but also more restless. The soap had washed off more than dirt. It had scrubbed away the numbness that kept them quiet. Then the letter arrived. A courier handed it to Captain Richter, who read it, grunted, and strode toward the yard where Evelyn was sorting bandages. "Orders from Washington," he said. "Big changes coming." The women sensed something before Evelyn could explain. They gathered near the fence, murmuring, their voices rising. Annalise's eyes searched Evelyn's face. "What is it?" she demanded. Evelyn swallowed hard. "I don't know yet," she said. "But I'll find out." She could feel the entire camp leaning toward her, as if her next words might tip them into hope or despair. The soap, the skirts, the singing, they had been enough for a time. But now something larger loomed, something that could shatter what fragile peace they had built. As the sun set, Evelyn walked back toward the office, the letter crumpled in her fist. Behind her, the women waited, their skirts snapping in the wind like a row of flags. Whatever Washington had decided, it would change everything. The letter from Washington sat like a coiled snake on Captain Richter's desk, its seal already broken, its contents read and reread until the paper had gone soft at the creases. Evelyn Carter stood in front of him, cap in hand, as he drummed his fingers on the wood. "They're sending some of the women back," he said finally. "Repatriation orders. Not all, just the first batch. The rest will stay until further notice." Evelyn's stomach tightened. "How many?" 50. His jaw worked as though the number left a bitter taste. "Names attached. Transport scheduled for the end of the month." She took the paper, scanning the neat typewritten list. Names she had come to know: Marta, Erica, a mother with twin boys, 2 sisters who braided each other's hair every night. "Do they know yet?" she asked. "Not yet. And I'd like to keep it that way until we've got things organized." "You think they won't take it well?" "I think any news can turn this place upside down if you give it too soon." He exhaled smoke toward the ceiling. "I need calm. You've done good work keeping the lid on this place, Carter. Don't let it blow now." But news was a living thing in the camp. By evening, whispers had begun. Someone had seen the letter, someone had heard the courier mention trains. The German word Heimkehr, homecoming, floated through the air like pollen, landing on every conversation. Evelyn felt it the next morning as she crossed the yard. The women's eyes followed her with a new intensity, as if she carried answers stitched into her uniform. Annalise approached her near the water barrel, voice low but urgent. "There is talk," she said. "They say some of us will be sent home." Evelyn hesitated. She could lie, but something in Annalise's gaze made her choose otherwise. "Yes," she said simply. The camp seemed to inhale all at once. By noon everyone knew. Excitement and fear tangled together like threads in a too tight weave. Some women wept with joy, others clutched their children, terrified of what awaited them in a country bombed to rubble. That night, as lanterns flickered in the barracks, Evelyn found Margot sitting on the steps, her Bible open in her lap. "They are afraid," Margot said quietly. "Some want to go home, some would rather stay. They ask me which is God's will. I do not know." Evelyn sat beside her. The night smelled of dry grass and laundry hung too long in the heat. "What do you want?" she asked. "I want them to have a choice," Margot said. "But choices are for free people." In the days that followed, the mood in camp shifted like weather. There were bursts of song, bursts of laughter, but also fights, sharp words, sudden shoves. One woman accused another of bribing the Americans to get on the list. Hilda wept when she discovered she and her older sister were to be separated, one slated for transport, the other not. Dusty tried to lighten the mood by bringing out a baseball and showing the younger women how to throw. "See," he said, tossing the ball into the dusty yard, "you just wind up and let her fly." The women laughed at first, their throws wild, the ball rolling under the fence. Soon they were running, skirts flying, hair coming loose. Even Annalise cracked a smile as she caught the ball with surprising grace. For a brief hour, the camp felt almost like a schoolyard. But when evening came, the tension returned, heavier than before. One afternoon, a jeep arrived with a journalist in a khaki jacket and round spectacles. He introduced himself as Tom Ellison, war correspondent for a Chicago paper, and said he was here to write a human interest story about the enemy women learning to live in America. Evelyn bristled. "They're not an exhibit," she said. "Public wants to know what happens to prisoners after the war," he replied cheerfully. "A nice piece might remind folks we're not savages." He wandered the camp, notebook in hand, sketching details with quick strokes of his pen. The skirts drying on the line, the children chasing each other through the dust, the hymns singing at twilight. He even tried to interview Annalise, who answered in clipped English. "What will you write?" she asked him. "That you are all adjusting well," he said, smiling as though that solved everything. She looked past him toward Evelyn. "We are adjusting," she said. "But we are not at peace." That night Evelyn found her at the fence, staring at the horizon. "Do you want to go home?" Evelyn asked. Annalise was silent for a long time. "Home," she said finally. "Is the schoolhouse burned to the ground, my parents gone, my brother missing? I do not know if home exists anymore." She turned, her face pale in the moonlight. "What do you do when the place you belong to is gone?" Evelyn swallowed. "You build another place," she said. But her voice sounded thin even to her own ears. Days passed in uneasy rhythm. The transport date drew closer, and the women's emotions swelled like a river against its banks. Some prepared carefully, braiding hair, mending skirts, writing letters they hoped to deliver. Others withdrew, sullen, as though preparing for punishment. On the morning of the selection, Evelyn stood near the gate as Richter read off the names. Each name was a bell tolling through the camp. Marta, Erica, Hilda's sister. A sob broke out in the crowd. When the reading was done, the chosen women stood apart, a ragged group of 50, their faces a mixture of relief and grief. The others watched silently, hands clenched. That night there was no singing. The camp lay under a heavy hush, broken only by the occasional cough or restless cry. Evelyn sat on the steps of the infirmary, staring at the sky. The stars felt indifferent, scattered across the vast Kansas night. Dusty joined her, handing her a tin cup of weak coffee. "Tough day," he said. "They think this is the end," she said. "Ain't it? For some, maybe. For others it's just another waiting game." She rubbed her eyes. "And I can't even promise them it will get better." He was quiet for a moment, then said, "You ever think we're all just cleaning up the mess, Carter? Like we got handed the broom after the party's over?" She gave a tired laugh. "Maybe. But somebody has to sweep." 2 nights before the transport, a storm rolled over the plains. The wind howled, driving dust against the barracks, rattling the windows. Evelyn lay awake, listening to the women whispering in the dark. At one point she heard singing, soft, defiant, carrying above the wind. When morning came, the camp was coated in a thin layer of mud. The women emerged, skirts damp, hair tousled, but there was a strange light in their eyes, as though they had endured a trial together. On the day of departure, the truck arrived early, its engine growling like an impatient beast. The chosen women lined up, holding small bundles of belongings. Hilda clung to her sister until Annalise gently pried her away. Evelyn walked alongside them as they boarded, offering what little comfort she could. She saw hope and dread etched into every face. When the truck rumbled away, a cloud of dust trailing behind it, the women left behind stood staring long after it vanished. Then someone whispered, "When will we go?" No one answered. That evening, Evelyn gathered the remaining women near the fence. "More orders will come," she said, her voice steady. "But until then we keep living. We keep working. You have made this place better than it was. Don't stop now." Annalise looked at her a long moment, then nodded. "We will try." But as night fell, Evelyn could not shake the feeling that something had shifted in the air. The camp was too quiet, the kind of quiet that precedes a storm. She stood by the gate long after lights out, the prairie wind tugging at her hair. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rumbled again, low and ominous. When the first fat drops of rain struck the dust, she did not move. The storm was coming back, and this time she had the terrible sense it would not be satisfied with simply wetting the ground. The storm broke just after midnight. It began with wind, long low moans sweeping across the Kansas plains. Then came the rain, slanting hard, hammering the roofs until they drummed like marching boots. Evelyn Carter woke to the sound of shutters banging and women shouting in the dark. She grabbed her lantern and ran into the yard, rain soaking her uniform in seconds. The camp was chaos. Water pooled fast, turning the yard into a shallow river. Skirts clung to thin legs as women scrambled to pull children out of the rising mud. The wind caught the laundry line and tore it loose, skirts whipping away into the night like startled birds. "Get everyone inside." Captain Richter bellowed from the office doorway, his hat already plastered to his head. "They'll drown in there." Evelyn shouted back, pointing to the low barracks, where water was already spilling under the doors. He swore under his breath, then turned to Dusty. "Open the depot, get sandbags." Dusty was already running, his silhouette vanishing into sheets of rain. Evelyn splashed toward the nearest barack and pushed inside. The air was thick with fear and dampness. A baby wailed. A woman clutched a rosary so hard the beads dug into her palms. "Up!" Evelyn yelled, motioning toward the door. "Move to the mess hall, it's higher ground." Annalise appeared out of the shadows, hair unbraided and plastered to her face. "I will help," she said, her voice sharp with command. She turned to the others, rattling off orders in German. The women obeyed, forming a line to pass buckets, lift bundles, gather what could be saved. They poured out into the storm, rain stinging their faces. Evelyn grabbed a child from the arms of a stumbling mother and hoisted her onto her hip. The mess hall doors loomed through the downpour like a lighthouse beacon. Inside, the hall smelled of wet wood and panic, but it was dry. They packed the women shoulder to shoulder, water dripping from their skirts. Hilda sat against the wall, clutching her knees, her wide eyes fixed on the door as though it might vanish. Outside, Dusty and a handful of soldiers were fighting the flood with sandbags, shoveling mud in a losing battle. "We can't hold it much longer," he shouted over the roar. "We have to," Evelyn called back. A gust of wind ripped the gate from its hinges with a metallic shriek. Barbed wire sagged, then gave way entirely, the whole section collapsing under the force. The women gasped as though the sound had torn something inside them. Freedom lay just beyond, a dark field glistening with rain. For a terrible moment, Evelyn thought they would run. She saw it in their eyes: panic, temptation, the sudden memory of life beyond the fence. Annalise stepped forward, planting herself in the doorway. "No one leaves," she said in German, her voice hard as steel. "If you go, you will be hunted. Stay, and we will survive this night together." The women hesitated, then slowly sank back onto the benches, the spell of the broken fence broken by her authority. Lightning split the sky, blinding white. In the flash, Evelyn saw Richter standing near the collapsed gate, his uniform caked in mud, barking orders to the men. They worked like demons, stacking bags, diverting water, trying to save what they could. A sudden shout tore through the rain. One of the children had slipped back outside, chasing after a floating piece of wood. Evelyn didn't think, she ran, heart hammering. Her boots sank deep into the mud as she reached the edge of the flooded yard. The child was already waist-deep, struggling against the current. She plunged in, icy water closing over her thighs. Her fingers caught the child's arm just as her footing gave way. The current yanked her sideways, pulling both of them under. For a terrifying second, there was only darkness, the taste of mud in her mouth, the roar of water in her ears. Strong hands grabbed her, hauling her up. She coughed, gasping, clinging to the child who sobbed against her shoulder. Margot stood over her, soaked but calm, as if she had been waiting for this exact moment. "Inside," Margot said simply, and helped them back to the mess hall. Evelyn collapsed onto the wooden floor, shaking as the women crowded close, drying the child, wrapping her in spare cloth. "Thank you," Evelyn whispered to Margot. Margot merely crossed herself. "We are all in God's hands tonight." The storm raged on, but something had changed. The women no longer cowered. They moved with purpose, reinforcing the door with crates, mopping up water with rags, comforting the children. Annalise moved among them like a conductor guiding an orchestra, her voice clear over the thunder. Hours passed. The wind began to die, the rain easing into a steady drizzle. Dawn came gray and pale, revealing the damage. The yard was a swamp, the fence torn open, the depot half collapsed. But no one had been lost. The women filed out slowly, blinking in the watery light. Hilda was the first to laugh, splashing barefoot through a puddle. Others followed, washing their faces, their skirts, their arms. The air smelled of wet earth and soap where the bars had melted in the rain. Evelyn stood in the yard, exhausted, mud streaking her uniform, watching as the women began to hang their skirts on the fallen fence to dry. The sight struck her with unexpected force, skirts fluttering like flags, not of surrender but of survival. Captain Richter approached, his face grim but not without respect. "You held them together," he said quietly. "If they'd panicked, we'd have had a stampede." "I didn't do it alone," she said, glancing at Annalise, who was wringing out her hair with a look of grim satisfaction. Richter nodded. "Washington will hear about this. Might even speed up the next transport. After last night, they'll want this camp cleared." The words hit Evelyn harder than she expected. She looked at the women, muddy, laughing softly, alive, and felt an ache deep in her chest. They had survived the night together, become something more than captor and captive. And soon they would be gone. That evening, when the sun broke through the clouds, it painted the camp gold. The women gathered in the yard, humming softly, their voices rising with the light. Evelyn sat on the step of the mess hall, listening. Dusty joined her, wiping mud from his hands. "Funny," he said. "Place almost looks pretty now." "It does," Evelyn said. Annalise approached, her skirt still damp but clean, her chin lifted. "You saved us," she told Evelyn. No, Evelyn said. We saved each other. Annalise considered that, then nodded once. When we go home, she said, I will tell them we were treated with honor. Evelyn felt her throat tighten. That's all I could ask. As twilight settled, Evelyn walked to the broken section of fence. The skirt still hung there, fluttering in the evening breeze. She reached out, touching the damp cloth, feeling its weight. The storm had washed the camp raw but also clean. The women would leave soon, but this night would remain, a quiet, indelible mark on all of them. Somewhere behind her, someone began to sing, not a hymn of grief but a song of homecoming. The others joined, voices threading through the air. The sound carried beyond the camp, out over the wet fields as though calling the world to witness. Evelyn stood very still, her hand resting on the fence. For the first time since the war began, she felt something that was neither victory nor defeat, but something steadier, truer. Peace, she thought. This is what peace feels like. The song swelled, filling the night, and for a moment it seemed the stars themselves bent lower to listen.